In the shadows of a luxurious house, a girl with an innocent gaze dares to defy fear and escape from her stepmother's screams. Dressed in red, nobody imagined that her small steps, hugging a teddy bear, would lead her toward a destiny that would change her life forever. What city are you watching this video from? And what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. And before continuing, let me wish you health and peace. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? Outside, the grand house in Boston seemed to sleep under the late autumn rain. But inside, the atmosphere was as cold as the stones of the nearby church. Sophia, barely 7 years old, held against her chest an old rag doll, the only memory she had left of her mother. Every corner of the house felt alien, hostile, as if the walls themselves repeated her stepmother's words. Miriam, with her tight dress and lips painted intense red, walked through the hallway with firm steps. From time to time, she looked at the girl with a gesture of contempt, as if that fragile being were only an obstacle in her plans. The father's absence still weighed like a ghost nobody wanted to name. The dining room table, once full of laughter, now remained empty and silent. Miriam drank black coffee, offering not even a crumb to Sophia, who watched in silence from a corner. The sound of the church bells marked the hours with a solemnity that seemed infinite to the girl. Each chime was a reminder that her world had been reduced to loneliness and constant scolding. That night, Miriam exploded over a trivial detail, a glass poorly placed in the kitchen. Her voice resonated harshly. "You're useless. You're good for nothing." Sophia shrank with the doll in her hands, as if that object could defend her. She ran to her room, where the walls were cold and bare, and began to whisper to her doll as if it were her mother. In a low voice, she asked her to come find her, to take her away from that place. In her innocence, she believed that murmur could reach beyond the stars. The argument with Miriam didn't take long to explode again. The woman, tired of what she called childish nonsense, accused her of ruining her life and being an obstacle to everything she deserved. Sophia felt those words were confirmation of what she feared so much. She would never be loved in that house. Her heart, small but brave, made a decision with no turning back. If she stayed, she would wither. If she left, at least she would have a chance to find a corner in the world where someone would look at her with tenderness. Rain began to hit the windows hard. Sophia looked at her doll, pressed her lips together, and approached the main door. The main door. Miriam continued arguing in the living room without noticing the girl's soft steps. The distant sound of a street musician in the square and the smell of roasted chestnuts arriving from the wet streets were like a call. The girl opened the door carefully and the cold air hit her face. She felt fear but also a strange relief. For the first time, there was nobody to tell her she couldn't. The sky was dark and the wind dragged wet leaves. Before venturing toward the woods, Sophia took refuge for a few minutes under a portico, trembling and hugging her doll until gathering strength to keep running. Each step was a challenge for her little legs. Each drop of water that soaked her dress was like a heartbeat, reminding her she was alive, that she could still choose her destiny. The doll hung from her arm, wet, but Sophia didn't let it go. It was the only thing connecting her to her mother. As she ran, the city's lights seemed to blur in puddles and reflections. The sound of carriages and cars passing surrounded her, but she didn't stop. The idea of going back caused her unbearable pain. She knew she couldn't return to that place where love didn't exist, where everything was silence and reproaches. There was something inside her, a small but firm spark, that told her she should keep going. Her steps led her toward the outskirts, toward where the Charles River whispered in the darkness. The wind smelled of wet earth and uncertain promises. Sophia thought of her mother, of the lullabies she used to sing, and felt that somehow she guided her in that escape. She didn't know where she was going or what she would find, but each church bell chime arriving from afar was like a push encouraging her not to stop. Her dress stuck to her skin, her shoes were soaked, but her eyes shone with a new determination. Despite the cold, despite the fear, she had discovered she could be brave. A 7-year-old girl could have the strength of an army when hope was the only thing sustaining her. Under the freezing rain, the girl runs out into the darkness without looking back, her body exhausted from flight. Sophia walked until her small feet couldn't go on anymore. The city remained behind, and the echo of bells faded among wet trees that seemed like giants in the shadows. The girl advanced along a muddy path with her dress stuck to her body and the soaked doll under her arm. Each branch creaked like a threatening whisper, but she didn't stop. The woods, though dark, were better than the house where affection didn't exist. A ray of moonlight pierced the heavy clouds just when Sophia slipped near the river. For an instant she thought she would fall into the water, but managed to grab onto a branch. Sophia raised her gaze and for an instant thought her mother was watching her from up there. With a thread of voice she murmured, "Mom, take care of me from there." The silence broke with an unexpected sound. A strong creak, not from wind or animal. Her eyes opened wide. Among the shadows appeared the silhouette of a forgotten construction. A small cabin with a moss-covered roof and cracked walls. The girl's heart pounded hard. Would it be a refuge or a trap? She approached trembling with the doll pressed against her chest. The doorknob was cold like the metal of a church in winter. She pushed with all her strength, and the door gave way with a squeak that echoed throughout the woods. The interior smelled of old wood and dust, but there was something welcoming in that aroma. The floor creaked under her bare feet. She distinguished a table, shelves with worn books, and an extinguished fireplace. Everything seemed abandoned, though surprisingly cared for. She ventured in with uncertain steps and found a room with a bed covered by a wool blanket. Exhaustion overcame her. She thought of lying down, but another noise paralyzed her, a creak from the back of the cabin. Sophia stepped back with her heart in her throat. A figure appeared in the doorway, an elderly woman with white hair pulled back, wrapped in a dark shawl and leaning on a cane. Her eyes, tired but deep, revealed the trace of an ancient pain. Many years ago she had lost her only son and since then lived alone in that cabin. Her deep eyes like embers looked at her in silence. "What is a girl doing alone in my house?" the woman asked with a grave voice. Sophia wanted to speak but only managed to let out a sob. A tear rolled down her cheek when she murmured, "I have nowhere to go." Mrs. Dolores, as the elderly woman was called, observed her at length. It had been decades since anyone crossed that door. The girl's appearance, trembling with cold and hugging a doll as if it were her treasure, awakened in her memories she believed buried. With a sigh, she lit a candle. The warm light filled the room, and for an instant the cabin ceased being a gloomy place. The girl obeyed when the elderly woman indicated a chair. Her stomach growled loudly. Dolores, without pronouncing a word, placed before her a piece of hard bread. Sophia devoured it with tears in her eyes, savoring the simple sensation of eating without fear. While chewing, she opened her rag doll and took out a notebook hidden in the folds of her dress. She placed it on the table and pointed to a clumsy drawing, a smiling woman with long hair. "She's my mom," she whispered. "She's not here anymore, and Mrs. Miriam says she'll never come back." The elderly woman's face hardened. She gripped her cane tightly, remembering her own pain from years ago. Rain hit the windows, but inside the silence was even heavier. Dolores breathed deeply, aware she was about to open an unexpected chapter in her life. "You can stay tonight," she finally said. Sophia's eyes shone with a fragile but intense hope. She didn't know that tonight would be the beginning of a completely new destiny, both for her and for the woman who had just extended her hand. The girl curled up under the hand-woven blanket, while the elderly woman, seated in a rocking chair next to the window, watched her attentively. Outside, the woods seemed to keep secrets. Among branches and shadows, something moved in silence, as if someone else had followed Sophia's steps there. The elderly woman narrowed her eyes and gripped her cane. The woods never stay completely silent, she thought. And tonight it was warning. Dawn in Boston arrived, covering the rooftops with a veil of mist. Inside the cabin, Sophia awoke slowly. The smell of burning wood filled the air. Mrs. Dolores had lit the fireplace at dawn, as she had done every morning for years. The girl opened her eyes, afraid to discover it had all been a dream. But upon seeing the fire burning, she felt that at least for one day she was safe. Dolores observed her in silence, seated in her rocking chair with her gaze fixed on the small figure wrapped in the wool blanket. There was something in Sophia's face, in her timid gestures, that stirred memories the elderly woman believed buried. The resemblance to someone from her past was so strong that at times time seemed to go backward. "What's your name, girl?" she finally asked with a hoarse voice. "Sophia," she answered, gripping her rag doll tightly. A beautiful name, Dolores said. And where do you come from? The answer came between sighs. The stepmother's house, the screams, the father's absence. Dolores frowned. Each word was a blow, an echo of injustices that life repeated in different generations. She served a glass of warm milk and placed it before the girl. Sophia drank slowly with a grateful gaze. The morning advanced. Dolores went out to collect herbs from the small garden next to the cabin, and Sophia followed her, still in the damp dress from the day before. While the elderly woman cut rosemary branches, the girl found a smooth stone on the ground and began to draw on the wet earth. She traced a face with clumsy lines, large eyes and a wide smile. Dolores approached and her heart stopped. That drawing resembled too much someone she had known well. Who is it? She asked with a thread of voice. She's my mom, Sophia responded, and her eyes shone with tears. The silence that followed was so dense that only a rooster's distant song broke it. Dolores pressed the cane against the earth. She didn't want to show her agitation. But inside, a whirlwind of memories shook her. The drawing's face matched that of a woman she hadn't seen in decades. During the afternoon, the elderly woman decided to go with Sophia to town. She needed fresh bread and dry firewood. Upon entering the square, neighbors greeted her courteously, surprised to see old Dolores accompanied by a girl. Sophia looked at everything with astonished eyes. The small shops, the cafe with iron tables on the sidewalk, the children running after a wet ball. At the bakery, the owner leaned toward Sophia and offered her a butter roll without charging. The girl took it with both hands and for the first time in a long while smiled with innocence. Dolores, however, noticed how some murmured behind their backs, wondering whose girl had appeared out of nowhere. Upon returning, when the sun began to hide behind the city's golden walls, Sophia approached the fireplace and opened her notebook again. She turned the pages until showing an older drawing, a man in a suit with a mustache, smiling. She pointed at it with her finger. "This was my dad," she whispered. "Miriam says he left forever." Dolores looked at it carefully. Her heart shrank. She recognized that figure. She had seen that man years ago, in another life, in another story that hadn't ended well. Destiny seemed to be closing an impossible circle. The girl raised her gaze with a mixture of innocence and hope. "Do you think a dad can come back?" The embers crackled in the fireplace. Dolores didn't respond immediately. Destiny had put that girl in her hands, and now she knew it wasn't coincidence. That night, while Sophia slept deeply under the blanket, Dolores opened a secret drawer in the dresser. She took out a wooden box full of old letters and yellowed photographs. In one of them, a male face identical to Sophia's drawing returned her gaze. She pressed it against her chest and closed her eyes. The wind blew hard outside, but inside what roared was something else, the certainty that the truth was about to come to light. The previous night's storm had left puddles in every corner of the woods, and the cabin smelled of humidity and freshly toasted bread. Sophia woke up with the feeling something had changed. Mrs. Dolores was more serious than usual, with an envelope in her hand that seemed to have been hidden for years. The girl, still with the rag doll in her arms, approached slowly. "What's that?" she asked with curiosity. "Old letters," the elderly woman responded, avoiding her gaze. "Memories I thought I'd never open again." Dolores had spent much of the early morning reading those letters written by a man who was once an essential part of her life and who she now discovered was connected to Sophia. Each word confirmed what she already suspected. The girl hadn't arrived at her door by chance. She decided to take a walk with Sophia to the Charles River overlook. The morning sun reflected on the waters, and the church towers stood imposingly in the background. Sophia, with her innocence, talked about how she imagined her mother in heaven embroidering stars. Dolores listened with a shrunken heart, aware she had a duty, to find the girl's father and face the past. As they walked through Faneuil Hall, the girl stopped in front of a shop window displaying children's dresses. Her reflection in the glass returned a fragile image, the threadbare dress and disheveled hair. Dolores was moved and entered the store. With firm hands, she chose a navy blue dress with white embroidery. Sophia held it carefully, as if afraid to spoil it. "Is it really for me?" she whispered. "Of course. Every girl deserves to feel loved," Dolores responded. The scene didn't go unnoticed. Among the people crossing the square, A man in a dark suit with a serious countenance stopped to look. His name was Mr. Fernando, a renowned businessman in Boston. Something in the girl's expression captured him. The way she hugged the dress and the tenderness in her eyes seemed disturbingly familiar. He didn't approach immediately, but from that instant couldn't get Sophia's image out of his mind. Back at the cabin, Dolores placed an old photograph on the table. Sophia leaned in and her eyes widened. "It's him!" she exclaimed with emotion. "It's my dad." Dolores swallowed. The face in the photo was the same man she had seen many times in local newspapers under business and charity headlines. Mr. Fernando. Destiny was tracing a path impossible to ignore. Dolores knew she couldn't continue hiding the truth. She had to find him, even if it meant reopening deep wounds. That night, while the girl slept peacefully with her new dress folded under the pillow, Dolores went out to the porch and looked toward the city's lights. The cold air enveloped her and her heart pounded hard. She didn't know how Fernando would react upon seeing Sophia. Would he accept her? Deny the obvious? The only certainty was that everyone's life was about to change. The creak of a branch broke the silence. Dolores turned her head and saw a silhouette among the trees. A tall figure, motionless, that seemed to observe the cabin from the distance. The premonition was clear. The past had already found the way to her door. The next day dawned with a different air. Boston vibrated with the bustle of a Sunday market. Bells rang. Vendors offered cheeses and cold cuts, and the aroma of hot chocolate mixed with that of roasted chestnuts. Mrs. Dolores made the decision to take Sophia to the city's heart. She knew she couldn't delay the encounter with truth any longer. The girl, in her newly worn navy blue dress, walked at her side with a timid but hopeful step. Her eyes marveled at every detail: the colorful shawls, the guitars playing on corners, the children running after red balloons. Dolores, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about Fernando. She carried the photograph in her purse as a reminder of the bridge she had to build. They arrived at a cafe terrace in Faneuil Hall. The mid-morning sun illuminated the arches and golden facades. Dolores ordered black coffee and a glass of milk for Sophia. While the girl played with the steam rising from the cup, a shadow projected over the table. It was him. Mr. Fernando, impeccably dressed, had been observing them from the distance, and now approached with decided steps. "Excuse me," he said with a grave voice, looking at Sophia. "May I ask the girl's name?" Dolores raised her gaze, serene but with a knot in her throat. Sophia answered before her with spontaneity. "My name is Sophia." Fernando paled. The name pierced his chest like a dormant memory. He observed the girl's features, the clear eyes, the smile's curve. He leaned down a bit more and asked with a tremor in his voice, "And your mother, what was her name?" "Isabel," Sophia answered almost in a whisper. The silence that followed was so dense that even the waiters stopped for an instant. Fernando stepped back as if the ground had disappeared under his feet. Isabel. That name he had never been able to erase from his memory. She had left Boston without saying goodbye, hiding her pregnancy, and Miriam had intercepted the letters Isabel sent him. Isabel had been his great youthful love, the woman with whom he dreamed of a future that never came to be. Fernando's hands trembled. He sat before the girl, incapable of taking his eyes off her. Dolores observed him attentively, knowing that instant would mark a before and after. "You? Are you my daughter?" Fernando asked with contained tears. Sophia looked at him confused, clung to the rag doll and shook her head. "I don't know," she said with the innocence only a child can have. "I just know I don't have a dad." The phrase fell like a knife in Fernando's heart. A man accustomed to power, to business, to applause, suddenly felt small, guilty, incomplete. He looked at Dolores seeking answers, and she, with a firm voice, told him, "Fernando, this girl deserves the truth. You know better than anyone where that gaze comes from." The market's murmur continued around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding at that table. Fernando closed his eyes for an instant, and when he opened them, they were clouded with tears. "If you're my daughter," he whispered, "I won't let you feel alone again." Sophia contemplated him in silence, without fully understanding the scope of his words, but inside something stirred, a strange warmth, as if suddenly the world stopped being so cold. Dolores gripped the purse where she kept the letters, aware the next step would be the most difficult, confronting Miriam, the stepmother who had made Sophia's life hell. Meanwhile, in a corner of the square, a woman with a hat observed the scene with eyes charged with resentment. Miriam had followed Sophia's steps there, and now, upon seeing Fernando lean toward the girl, she felt her control over the situation crumbling. The past, present, and future were about to collide in an inevitable explosion. The afternoon fell over Boston with a reddish sky that tinted the golden stones of Faneuil Hall with fire. Sophia walked between Mrs. Dolores and Fernando, still without understanding the magnitude of what was happening. The bustle of street musicians and the aroma of roasted chestnuts created a festive atmosphere, but in the hearts of the three reigned a silent tension. Suddenly, a cutting voice broke the calm. Miriam appeared from the square's arches with a hardened face and eyes full of rage. She advanced without stopping until grabbing Sophia by the arm with brusqueness. "You're coming with me right now!" she exclaimed harshly, making the girl let out a scream of fear. Fernando stood up immediately, hitting the table with his hand. "Let her go, Miriam," he ordered with a voice that thundered louder than the church bells. The woman looked at him defiantly. "You have no right over her. I'm the one who's taken care of this girl for years." Dolores took a step forward, leaning on her cane. "Take care?" she said with a grave voice. "You didn't care for her, you punished her. And Sophia deserves to know the truth once and for all." Fernando took from his jacket's inside pocket a wrinkled envelope. His hands trembled, but his voice remained firm as he read aloud one of the letters. "Our daughter deserves to know her father, even though I'm no longer here." The silence extended throughout the terrace. Some curious onlookers had stopped to observe the scene and murmured among themselves. "Leave her alone," a woman from the market shouted. "A girl doesn't deserve this," an old man added. The murmur transformed into a popular clamor against Miriam. Miriam stepped back, incapable of reacting, while Sophia opened her eyes with incredulity. "My daughter," Fernando repeated in a whisper, and then knelt down before the girl. "Sophia, I am your father, and if you accept me, I promise you'll never feel alone again." Tears slid down the face of the man who until then had been considered cold and distant. Sophia looked at him for a long time with the rag doll pressed against her chest. Doubt pierced her, but in Fernando's eyes she found something she had never seen in Miriam: true tenderness. With a timid movement, she released the doll and threw herself into his arms. The entire square exploded in spontaneous applause. Waiters smiled, an elderly woman crossed herself, and even the musicians stopped playing to observe the scene. Miriam, defeated, disappeared into the crowd without saying a word. That night, Sophia slept in a warm room, with clean sheets and the certainty she was no longer alone. Fernando contemplated her from the door and understood his life had changed forever. The house that for years had been empty of affection, now filled with children's laughter and new hope. The following days consolidated the bond. Father and daughter walked across the bridge, shared hot chocolate with donuts in the square, and lit a candle together at the church. In front of the flame, Fernando whispered, "Isabel, I failed in the past, but I promise I'll care for Sophia with everything I am." The girl, with innocence, added, "Mom, I'm not alone anymore." The bells rang like a blessing. Dolores from a nearby bench let out a sigh of relief. She had fulfilled her duty to unite what destiny had separated. With the passing of months, Fernando discovered that true wealth wasn't in his companies or properties, but in the warmth of a home. Sophia filled the house with colorful drawings and improvised songs. The man, once alone and cold, became a present father, grateful for the second chance life had given him. One spring afternoon, seated by the Charles River, Sophia rested her head on her father's shoulder and murmured with a calm voice, "Dad, thank you for not leaving me alone." Fernando closed his eyes and kissed her forehead. He knew then he needed nothing more. The past was forgiven, the future open, and the present full of love. When the echo of Boston's bells faded away, the image that remained engraved was that of a father kneeling, embracing his daughter, and of an elderly woman who, after carrying so many silences, could finally breathe in peace. It wasn't a sudden miracle, but a chain of decisions, of small but brave steps. The flight of a girl under the rain, the compassion of a lonely woman, and the late awakening of a man who learned to look beyond business. And to you, dear listener, I ask, If this story has touched your heart, leave a comment with the number 1. And if you believe it could have been told differently, write the number 0. From this journey emerges a teaching that doesn't age with years. Love, when sincere, has the strength to repair what seemed broken. Life offers us second chances, even if they arrive late, even if they hurt, even if they force us to recognize mistakes. Selfless kindness, that of an elderly woman who opened her door, that of a girl who still knew how to trust, that of a man who asked for forgiveness, changes destinies. Everyone, even those who feel alone or marked by ancient guilt, deserves a family, a tender gaze, a place to rest the soul. Like the discreet light of a candle lit in a window, a gesture of affection can guide us through existence's darkest nights. Now, when you close your eyes tonight, perhaps you'll remember that true wealth isn't measured in accounts or titles, but in the warmth of a small hand seeking yours, in forgiveness granted in time, in the opportunity to start again. Dedicate a few minutes to think about your own story, about those people to whom you can still extend a hand. And if this narration has awakened something inside you, share it with someone else. Because each shared story is a bridge, and each bridge brings us a little closer to the hope of never being alone again.